calculation that I did with the figures.
Okay, very quickly, Khoo. So there were not any broad tax reforms as you hoped, but were there any tax incentives in this budget that did please you?
Well, having analyzed what was announced a while ago, I don't think there was any new incentive announced to basically spur the private sector to take the leading role. And I think a lot of tax proposals that have been introduced are merely extension of existing incentives, or perhaps increasing the threshold insofar as the relief is concerned. So from that perspective, in order for the government to spur private sector, I think there has got to be much more than extending what is currently available. When green technology, for instance, is something that government wanted to do, it's part of government's agenda. Spurring private sector to be more engaged in food production, that's not something new. So perhaps I think what was missing, to my mind, was the encouragement to the private sector, particularly the small and medium enterprises, to consider reinvesting their what you call their earnings into, or moving into new sectors, encouraging risk-taking, entrepreneurship, for instance. But I think the current tax structure does not seem to encourage that. Case in point is when you talk about group relief. Group relief, particularly with regard to losses incurred by a company, which can actually be used by another company with profitable business. Insofar as SMEs are concerned, they're not eligible for that relief, simply because the qualifying criteria is one has got to have its paid-up capital more than 2.5 million. But by definition, SME is one whose paid-up capital is less than or not more than 2.5 million. So through a stroke of pen, if you like, you're basically excluding this category of taxpayers from enjoying group relief, for instance.
Okay, we're going to have to take a quick break, gentlemen, and we'll be back right after this to discuss more about what we found in Budget 2011's announcement. Welcome back to NTV7's Budget 2011 talk show, brought to you by AmBank Group. Now, before the break, our guests sort of described the Budget 2011 as sort of a budget without any major tax reforms, as well as a micro budget, a budget that didn't really touch on the macro, the major transformative measures, but rather on the more micro. But despite that, there were lots of little goodies that were thrown in for lay people. For example, a private pension fund for private sector and self-employed. Another one, no toll increase for the next 4 years. Also, a big sales tax exemption on, import duty exemption on 300 branded goods. And Skim Rumah Pertamaku, lots of little goodies for young middle-income earners. So can I get your impressions, gentlemen, on these goodies and what that means for Malaysians?
Well, I particularly like, I think, the attempt to focus perhaps on some kind of age profiling of the incentives, Not huge, but still is there. For example, I particularly like the scheme for first-time house buyers. And those cutting off income about 3,000 and below. And then you work out the details about that. And added to that, you sort of exempt them from stamp duty, something like that. I think that's very good. People come in, particularly in urban areas, urban living, cost of living rising and all that. I think that's a pretty good move, I think, and more of that, I think, would be very, very welcome. The second one, I think, which I also particularly like, because it's been talked about for many, many years, and now I see it in black and white, is the private pension fund. This has been talked about a long time, and it took a long time for it to be here in a budget speech. But the details still have to be worked out. How do you work it out, And I also like, because it said in the speech that the self-employed will be put into this kind of scheme. So now we're waiting for the real devil coming into what are the details now on this private pension fund. The other one I also like, I think, as I've been arguing for a long time, is to use fiscal measures to be inclusive from the regional dimension. I see a lot of intention given to Sabah and Sarawak, for example, I think a lot more of that, I think, would be very good, I think, on the political economy, development and growth. Sabah and Sarawak is given a lot of attention, particularly building infrastructure and so on. And generally, I think I really like the focus perhaps on the disadvantaged group, the marginalized groups, the gender aspect, and caring for the age and medical expense of the age. I think those are all, like what Khoo was saying, is already part of the pipeline. And it's good that they're continuing with that inclusive part of this budget.
Kamal.
Yeah, I would agree that there are a lot of what you call goodies for different groups of people. And from our point of view, we're particularly happy that there are particular incentives for people with disabilities. There's also this maternity leave.
Yes, 90 days.
90 days. Although the wording of it I'm trying to still understand. It says self-determination. But it means, as I understand it, mandatory 90 days. So I think that's a positive. There are things for children, for preschool children, and those kinds of measures from the UN's point of view, and particularly my colleagues in UNICEF. They would be very pleased with that. And, you know, again, like the housing related incentives for the poorer groups. So there are a number of those kinds of measures. And I think that if the budget had been presented right along as a budget for the poor or the people, you know, that would have been fine. But the stakes were much higher here.
Yeah.
And I think
you were
that's
expecting something completely different.
And it's also the title of the budget and the way it's presented as a, you know, following on from all these documents. So notwithstanding that, there are a number of those kinds of things. No increase in the toll rates for 5 years. So there, you can pull out many such things, which I'm sure many people will be very happy with.
And actually that announcement on Plus Expressways was also something completely unexpected because of all the speculation that was swirling around before the budget announcement that we would hear about some sort of takeover or purchase of Plus Expressways. So that also was something that we didn't see coming. Yeah. As for you, Khoo, we have now import duty abolishment on 300 branded goods to encourage tourists to come in and purchase their things in Malaysia. And in fact, in the appendix, half of the appendix at least is on all sorts of branded goods that you can now buy with no import duty at all. Do you foresee any significant drop in revenue for the government as a result of abolishing this import duty?
Well, obviously there will be a drop in the import duty and sales tax, but I guess that's going to be compensated by perhaps the revenue generated from increased arrival of tourists, for instance. You know, so I see more from the point of promoting tourism as opposed to the government, what you call losing revenue. But in any event, I think the loss of revenue is not very substantial. But more pleasing to note is that's a measure to basically boost tourism, a service sector that has been identified as a key growth area in Malaysia.
I also noticed that there was something on electric cars, under the section Green Policies, where they talked about now increasing or extending the import duty abolishment and 50% excise duty extended to electric cars and hybrid/electric motorcycles. So do you foresee a great increase in the numbers of these types of vehicles being produced in Malaysia? And would the benefit outweigh the loss of duty?
My quick response is it's still very uncertain, I think. It had a lot has to do with the prices. And according to my sort of knowledge about this thing, I think the prices are not going to be that attractive. It's still at quite relatively expensive, you know. So I think this maybe is one of the first early moves to see whether, to test the market, whether Malaysians would be able to sort of use this slight reduction to buy those imports. But I think it's going to be quite expensive still.
And also, I noticed on the stock markets, they're now encouraging government-linked investment companies to divest holdings in companies on Bursa, which is a significant move. And they hope to increase investment overseas to 20% from the current 7%. How would this? How does this look?
That divestment is an old kind of move. It's in the pipeline kind of way. That has always been part of the strategy because of the thin market. You want to build up liquidity. The free float, I think, is still very thin. Malaysia's stock market, you know, not deep enough. So that was the old idea of trying to divest, so that Khazanah and et al. And this kind of people sort of relinquish and then for the free float to be improved. That's part. It's not surprising. But what is mildly surprising now is the allowance of EPF, in fact, to go offshore. Because there were big controversies many years ago about riskiness of capital outflows.
And that is people's money out.
People worrying, why are you taking my money out? I save it here. Why don't we do it here? But now I think things have changed. Capital outflows, short-term and long-term, now very substantial. But the other so this is that you're sitting on these very surplus funds, and if in the very short to medium term you cannot utilize that here for all kind of reasons, then you should liberalize it a bit and allow EPF in fact to go offshore. And I think it's increasing to 20%.
Yes.
That is quite sizable.
Yeah.
And because there is condition in the EPF law that even when it was well below 20%, it has got to have the approval of the Minister of Finance. I'm not sure whether when they are silent on that, I think that condition still stands. So although in the speech it says that, in the implementation I think we've got to wait. Because I think there could be a counter reaction to that in tomorrow's papers and subsequently. I think people are getting worried now. They're taking my money out now without my permission.
The whole intention of this move is to actually liquefy the market, liquidate the market, make it more fluid. Do you think that this might make Bursa more attractive, or investing in local companies more attractive to foreign investment firms?
It could. It depends on which firms the divestment is in. And I mean, I've read somewhere that, you know, there's a divestment in companies like Malaysian Airlines and AirAsia, but the AirAsia bit is just 7%, so it's not a lot. So I think it will really depend on which of these which areas the divestments are in, and I would imagine that AirAsia might be attractive, whereas some of the others may not be.
Now,